morning, ethnomusicologist and music nerd Dr. Kirsten Zemke analyses a different musical genre, guiding you through its unique history against a backdrop of genre-defining tracks. Genre Rules, every Friday at 8:15 on 95 BFM Breakfast.
It's 12:24 on 95 BFM. You're on the wire for Thursday. Now, it's once more into the political fray, my friends, once more.
Oh, here he comes! Hey. Minister! How are you? Minister, answer. Well, how's your wife? Answer the question, Minister!
Counterclockwise with Selwyn Manning from livenews.co.nz.
Yes, once again I'm on the line with Selwyn Manning from livenews.co.nz. Selwyn, this week it's not going to be all cocktails and sunburn on the beach this summer for Labour leader David Shearer, is it?
No, quite to the contrary. I think he'll be smelling the sweet scent of barbecues going around his political arena, I think, Simon.
Yep, now, as I understand it, David Shearer's got David Cunliffe has got plenty of time over summer because he's been stripped of all his shadow portfolios to get up to a bit of mischief.
Well, that's one of the options that is obviously there. I think, in essence, in looking at this and watching the whole thing play out since the weekend, the Labour Party leader, David Shearer, I think, has made a strategic blunder. In this case, we can see a likely scenario. Now, David Cunliffe's been basically booted back into the most lowly position seat in the Labour Party debating part of the debating chamber. What we can see here is a scenario where David Cunliffe supporters potentially can silently work their messages, reconnecting, if you like, with their caucus colleagues. This really is the time when they would start to do that through December and through January. And I understand when we're talking just off air with you, Simon, that it's expected that the Parliament would come back late January, which would be quite early. So what the opportunity there now really is for Cunliffe's supporters. Remember, he's got a handful of MPs in the Labour Party caucus that obviously support him. The challenge for Cunliffe is for him not to do the brokering with other MPs, but for his other MP supporters to basically go out to do that for him.
Are there some fairly silver-tongued followers of Cunliffe's that could do this for him?
Yeah, there are a number of MPs that are loyal. You know, there are people, very experienced ones too, like Leanne Dalziel, for example, Charles Cheval. You know, there's some thinkers there. But what they tend to do in these types of situations when one of their main hopes has been kicked into touch is that they start working, you know, their connections with the other MPs, their friendships and establishing their networks. They keep that heir apparent leader out of the fray to a degree. It saves that person like David Cunliffe having to go through the demoralising process of looking like he's desperate on a one-on-one or one-to-many type kind of support bids. This is a similar strategy that was deployed when David Lange rose up and bowled Bill Rowling, the then party leader, to touch, basically. Back then, I'll just touch on it because it gives really a framework on how these things play out sometimes when it suits this type of strategy. But back then, David Lange clearly indicated amongst most people that he wanted the leadership. He delivered an important speech to the Labour Party members. He framed the policy points they had in common and established some sort of common ground there. Then David Lange kind of returned back down to Wellington, and he quietly worked in the back rooms with a faction that wanted to solidify its power. Once he had their ear and they knew they wanted him, he promised that faction that he'd honour its want for power over economics and finance, and that group then did the brokering on David Lange's behalf amongst caucus colleagues, and a lot of those caucus colleagues didn't like Lange at that stage. But obviously we know, and history tells us, that Roger Douglas, Michael Bassett and Richard Prebble, they were the actors of that faction. They pulled it in for him.
So coming back to 2012 though, because Labour's just had their conference and they have actually changed their selection rules for their leader. It seems to me that now it requires, let me see, 40% of the caucus to trigger a leadership contest, but at the same time the wider party also has to approve the the prospective choices, right?
Yeah, kind of. Yeah, it's the way it kind of goes. Yeah, the percentages is basically what they're after. Yeah.
Right. So would Shearer's, Cunliffe's supporters actually have their work really cut out for them? Because not only do they have to reach out to other caucus members, but they actually have to reach out to the wider party to get the support they need to actually roll Shearer.
Yeah, they do. And the fact of the matter is that many in the party apparatus clearly actually support a Cunliffe-led party. That was the message that the party basically gave to their caucus or the MPs when Phil Goff said he was standing down after the last election. In short, what Cunliffe's group needs to do is, on Cunliffe's behalf, work David Parker and his people, David Parker's group, get them in on side, if you like, through this Christmas season. Parker knows, for example, that Cunliffe and he worked impressively as a team. For example, you know, they had that taste of success over economics and finance, you know, and that debate that they really occupied when they pulled Winston Peters and Russell Norman in on that too, and that kind of on the currency debate and things like that. The government was left to trying to explain, which is that old adage, you know, if you explain, you lose. So they really showed that they were able to work as a team. But what they do need, if they can, you know, this is all where it all go quiet. The public won't hear much of this. If Cunliffe's group is successful in being able to work that on his behalf, well then there will be a lot of work that will be going on with the party apparatus. You're quite right there. There are people that are raising their eyebrows in silence at the moment, clearly, over David Shearer's move to kick David Cunliffe off the front bench. He is one of their biggest and brightest and best debaters. Now, if Cunliffe's group can't get a nod and a wink from Parker's people, and if that vital union faction, both outside of the caucus and inside, if they remain satisfied that David Shearer's pattern of drawing the party into the centre right, then Cunliffe's ambitions pretty much to lead in 2012, that general election. They'll be exhausted. He'll then have the option of, does he leave politics, does he leave the party, or does he sit, grimace and wait to see whether or not Shearer loses 2014. If Shearer lost that, then Cunliffe and his people would have a pretty strong argument with some authority, really, to then take the leadership.
Well, it's interesting because I did listen to a political commentator yesterday say that John Key's present strength actually mirrors that of Helen Clark's, and that heading into the next election he might be reaching the so-called peak of his powers, and so any Labour leader that goes up against him is basically isn't going to be successful. So looking long-term ahead here, is Cunliffe actually, let's say for instance if Cunliffe is successful in rolling Shearer, is somebody like Grant Robertson just going to be sitting there and thinking, you know what, I'm just going to sit this out until we lose again?
Oh, you know, where was Grant Robertson the 2 days after the convention on the weekend? He was very quiet publicly, and I'd say that he was working inside the party. These guys, they're ambitious. Grant Robertson clearly could lead the Labour Party, could clearly become a Prime Minister of note. There are people there that are rising that want to have a slice of the pie. David Cunliffe is one among them. There are many who would suggest that David Cunliffe, however, at this stage, has the credentials and the experience to take John Key on. We all know John Key is a slick operator. He's clearly a superstar for the National Party. To not put perhaps your best debater, a person who's intellectual enough to be able to strategically close John Key down. Many, I guess, would suggest that was folly. It certainly is strange to in the extreme for the party leader to demoralise and to kick into touch potentially his best attack dog in the debating chamber. That seems to be a tactic that neither John Key in the National Party nor the Labour Party predecessor Helen Clark would have done. You know, there's the old adage from the Godfather movies that you keep your enemies close. Shearer didn't do that.
And you keep Cunliffe closer. All right, yeah. So it looks like our summer breaks will probably be relatively peaceful. Don't know about the Labour parties. We'll talk next week, Selwyn. It's been good having you on the show once again.
Okay, Simon. Take care.
Silver Wire.
If you've just tuned in, we've just had our weekly chat with journalist and political affairs commentator Selwyn Manning. We've been gabbing about what's in store this summer for Labour leader David Shearer. Now, of course,